good to be back amongst friends again. We are terribly illegal with over 13 people. So at some point, 7 or 8 or 9 of you will have to vacate. Today I'm talking about global world hunger. I have to confess to an early interest in it. It was probably too many years in Sunday school that made me want to sort of cure the world of hunger. And so I started a degree in agricultural science, and for stupid reasons I got out of it and did science. But I mean, that was fortunate in a way, because I then studied under Professor Charles Birch, who was very good on population. So that sparked my interest in population issues. But I maintain an interest in world hunger over the decades, and come earlier this year, I was invited to be part of the first roundtable of the newly formed Commission on the Human Future, for the Human Future, the chair of which is Dr. John Hewson, or now Professor John Hewson. The secretary is Bob Douglas, who has a long-term association with SPA. That earlier report came out, and just sort of work out how I would do this, but maybe I'll just have to do that. Just to go back a step, I was inspired by Norman Borlaug, who was the father of the Green Revolution. I think one reason I stepped away from agricultural science, I realised the Green Revolution was happening and not someone else was doing it. If you want to read a really, really good speech on population, read Norman Borlaug's acceptance speech for the 1970 Peace Prize. I didn't read it in full until a couple of days ago, and I realised it was just just full of population issues. And he was saying basically that the Green Revolution has just given man breathing space while population continues to grow. Anyway, as I said, I was invited to be one of about 38 people in this Commission for the Human Future, which brought out this first report, Surviving and Thriving in the 21st Century. Julian Cribb, who was sort of a leading force in this, but the conclusion was that there are 10 catastrophic threats facing mankind. Now you can read them, but just to be brief, decline of natural resources, particularly water, collapse of ecosystems that support life and mass extinction, human population growth and demand beyond the Earth's carrying capacity, global warming, sea level rise, and universal pollution of the Earth and all life by chemicals. And then the next 5 were rising food insecurity, which is what I'm talking about today, nuclear arms and other weapons of mass destruction, pandemics of new and untreatable diseases, and God knows we're in the middle of a pandemic at the moment, advent of powerful uncontrolled new technologies such as AI, and national and global failure to understand and act preventatively on these risks, particularly in Australia. I was going to talk on that first report, but at the end of June, a month ago, or 4 weeks ago, they brought out a second report, which I actually didn't participate in, because there are people far more expert than me that participated in this roundtable, that came out with this report called on global food security, and the report was called Food is at the Heart of Our Future. And Bob Douglas wrote about that, and bear with me while I read from what Bob said in the Canberra Times of July the 7th. That was the picture. I'm not quite sure about the heading, because in fact what he was writing about was international stuff, and not just And in part of his article he says we need a Minister for Food, which was just sort of relating to national issues, but it was much broader than that, his article. And he said, action is required urgently to avoid starvation of millions. We can no longer take food availability for granted, despite our riches in land, skills and energy. That assertion is true for us in Australia, and it is already a life threat, in fact, in many parts of the world. The fracturing of the industrial food chains has already occurred during the current epidemic. Our long-term capacity to maintain food supplies is already imperiled by scarcity of soil, water and nutrients, and by climatic instability. Essential global action to remedy these risks is a long way from what is required, and Australia, despite having the most urgent need to do so, is at present evading the challenge, unquote. Bob Douglas went on to say that dealing with climate change was absolutely urgent and central to reclaiming a viable food future. So is the need to build on our capacity for regenerative agriculture and the need to develop a circular food economy in which we reclaim nutrients and reinvest them in the food system rather than discarding them. The Commission's report is basically divided into two, 10 risks and then 12 solutions or pathways. I'm going to break all my rules about PowerPoint where I really, should only be having graphs or pictures or something. I'm just giving you one or two sentences from each of these risks and then solutions. I'll probably read them with you, but you can see for yourself. Now, the first risk, industrial food production. It cannot be sustained in the longer term. It causes massive land degradation, wastes water and overuses toxic chemistry. It generates 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. It's a chief contributor to the loss of world's wildlife. It demands crops suited to industrial rather than nutritional needs. It wastes enough food every year to feed 3 billion people. It's exceptionally vulnerable to a changing climate. And the second risk was, among the greatest risks to global food security is the destruction of the natural resource base, soils, water, biodiversity and healthy ecosystems on which humanity's future ability to feed itself depends. Around 1/3 of the world's topsoil has been lost since 1970, and half of what remains will be gone by 1960, which I find personally quite terrifying. The third risk was global warming will increase the stress, unreliability and failure of existing food systems throughout much of the world through the lifetimes of our children due to heat waves, droughts, floods, shifting rainfall patterns, extreme weather events, fishery collapses, water wars, pest and disease outbreaks, more frequent and severe pandemics arising from land clearing. And 1.4, without mature worldwide discussion and preventive action on the issue of human carrying capacity of the planet, there's a high risk of irreversible damage to global ecosystems, biodiversity, and so to future food supply itself. You can see that this report, like that first report that the Commission came up with, is strong on population issues. Modern industrial food system is failing in dietary terms. Poor diet is now the leading cause of preventable disease, disability and premature death globally. It's implicated in 4 pandemics: diabetes, obesity, other non-communicable diseases that are related to cancer, heart, liver, and so on, and antibiotic resistance. And the sixth risk, our civilization currently produces around 5 billion tonnes of food a year, up to 2 billion of which is wasted in a world where nearly 1 billion people go hungry, which is horrible. The current agribusiness system drives farmers to become miners of their soils, water, landscapes and biodiversity degrading the very ecological system and climate-sustained healthy food production. Food security has 4 key components: production, storage, distribution and food safety. In many parts of the world, none of these are fit for purpose, as revealed by the COVID-19 crisis. Food failures have the potential to unleash mass refugee tsunamis out of afflicted regions, with domino-like destabilisation of neighbouring lands, their governments and even whole continents. This is foreshadowed in the Syrian refugee crisis and its impact on Europe and West Asia. So those are the risks. And I'll now move on to solutions or pathways. And once again, I just take 1 or 2 sentences from each one. This is the report, by the way. It's 33 pages long. It includes the authors of the report. So about 28 pages are actually what I'm giving you today, but much reduced in size. So in the first, I'm calling them pathways because I don't think they're really solutions, it's just the road to the solution. So the single most important framework for positive change is the Sustainable Development Goals. The second one, SDG 2, is zero hunger, end hunger, achieve food security and promote sustainable agriculture. I'll just say that the other day, last week, Nature Climate Change editorial said the SDGs are dead. COVID-19 has basically put the whole movement back such that they're unachievable. As you probably know, the SDGs are a 15-year objective from 2015 to 2030, such as zero hunger. And this editorial in Nature Climate Change is saying we're not trying to achieve them, except maybe 1 or 2. Second pathway, act now on climate change. The agricultural and fisheries sector must strive to achieve carbon neutrality by 2040. I'm going to come back to the population one. I know it was mentioned in the risks, but I actually deleted the section on risks on population and on pathways, and I'll deal with that after I've dealt with all the other things. Work towards renewable food by adopting regenerative food production, which applies ecological principles to agriculture and fisheries and ensures sustainable use of natural resources and ecosystem services. For those of you who don't know, SPA is organising what was meant to be the 2020 FENA conference, and it's going to be on making Australian agriculture sustainable. We had to delay it a year because of COVID-19. Hopefully it can be a face-to-face conference next year and an online conference. So cities must be redesigned for renewable food production. And this is Julian Cruz. Got his fingerprint on this one. Novel urban food systems include sky farms, rooftop farms, agritechnical designs, peri-urban horticulture, hydroponics, aquaponics, algae culture, entomoculture, I think that means eating insects, and biocultures of edible plant, animal, fungal and microbial tissues. Don't ask me for details on that one, I can't answer. Farming the oceans, aquaculture as presently practiced is unsustainable, though the problems are largely soluble. But new opportunities include large-scale farming of microalgae and sea plants, biocultures of marine protein and the rapidly emerging technology of deep ocean aquaculture. Again, I don't really know about deep ocean aquaculture. Transforming food, a stronger policy focus on the nutritional quality of food will help reduce the production and consumption of junk food. Renewable food systems must be socially equitable. So So we need to balance healthy and equitable food environments where food remains affordable to the vulnerable, with just and sustainable remuneration of family farmers, fishers and producers. I think in Australia, poor old dairy farmers haven't done too well under the Coles and Woolworths agreement on milk. Nature studies and holistic food production, for example, permaculture should be included in school curricula with both theoretical and hands-on components. There's already been great success with food gardens in hundreds of schools. Stephanie Alexander's idea this was, and been adopted on a wide scale and had a lot of success. The future of civilization demands effective national and global policies which integrate with other national and international policies such as climate, energy, water, healthcare, nutrition, regional and industry development, biodiversity, conservation, defence and security. One of the speakers we've got coming up for the FENA conference is Chris Barry, who was the head of defence, and he's very big on food security as a national security issue. Without food and water security, there can be no national security, as I said. Disputes over food, land and water underlie 2/3 of the 20 conflicts which have taken place worldwide since the start of the 21st century. One a year. And finally, to develop a renewable global food system requires a second green revolution, though a more sophisticated one focused on nutrition, equity and sustainability. So that's the sort of the broad picture for the report, but excluding population, which I'll now deal with. And once again, I've just taken out bare bones of it. So the issue of sustainable food supply for humanity through the 21st century is inseparable from the question of human population, at what level it may peak and how it can be brought down to a number capable of living within Earth's resources. Nor can these two issues be separated from the issue of climate change. I think that's the central message. It goes on to say population growth is the great driver of unsustainable use of water, food and other vital resources. Underpinning all 10 catastrophic threats to the human future is our failure to contain human numbers. So it doesn't pull any punches, it's as good as you're going to get, I think. And then it says both population growth in the developing world and reckless overconsumption of resources in the wealthy world need to be controlled if civilization is to survive. So, in terms of the pathways, the report says on a planet with finite resources we must try to ensure that the human population growth curve is flattened and then bring it down as quickly as is consonant with fairness and free will. It's sort of this flattening the curve has entered the language and now being applied to the population. Okay, now this is where it sort of gets slightly contentious. The two measures to flatten and even reduce population growth are economic growth and access for women to education, jobs, credit, health services and adequate food. And at first glance you think, okay, how we can't disagree with that, but then economic growth is now, like perceived as a problem where it entails resource growth and energy growth where it's not renewable. Renewable energy is okay, but not energy based on fossil fuels. But on the other hand, you've got to have economic growth to bring people out of poverty, so it's fair enough, I think. It's just, how far economic growth should go, really, before it starts to destroy the biosphere. Anyway, the second half, access for women to education, jobs, credit, health service and adequate food. Dr. Jane O'Sullivan, who's a member of the National Executive, she keeps saying all the time, and I think she's right, that the studies show that what you need to bring birth rates down and fertility down is contraception, universal access to contraception. And even in cases where women aren't educated or where they're undernourished, if they get contraception, then you can still bring birth rates down. This was particularly true, I think, in Bangladesh. So it's a bit disappointing, and had I been on this round table I might have made this point, but anyway, I mean, certainly access for women to education is critical, and, you know, for all the other things, particularly food, it is critical, and you can't really disagree with it. It's just that you would just like them to have spelled out a bit more that universal access to family planning or contraception is really central to it all. Now, I had a letter in the Canberra Times in response to Bob Douglas's article, and I'm just being lazy here. I'm repeating my letter, not to blow my own trumpet, but just simply because it was easier to do it this way, because I picked up some points which I perhaps would have said it anyway. So just to quote from my letter: at a global level, the World Food Programme is tackling rising tide of hunger in the world, made worse by the coronavirus pandemic. Plans to assist 138 million people in 83 countries with food aid, an extra 40 million on last year. It's concerned, however, that there may be as many as 270 million in need of assistance by the end of the year because of the effects of coronavirus. It was, I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that some of the warnings of, you know, this report are already coming true, and you know, not largely because of the coronavirus. If people cannot get enough food, we could see increased social unrest. I mean, this is what David Beasley, the World Food Programme Executive Director, said. If people cannot get enough food, we could see increased social unrest and protests, a rise in migration, deepening conflict, and widespread undernutrition among populations that were previously immune from hunger.